All right, finally. The original The Howling from director Joe Dante, 1981, starring Dee Wallace in one of her best roles. Love Dee Wallace. She's so good in this. She's so good in everything. Cujo, come on. She's fantastic. And they surround her with an amazing cast of characters played by some of my favorite people. You got Kevin McCarthy, Slim Pickens, John Carradine, Dick Miller. They surround her with some fantastic actors and actresses. And as we know, the entire cast pretty much turns out to be spoilers, fucking werewolves. So now, I love The Howling. This is one of many werewolf movies to come out in the mid '80s, like Silver Bullet, and there were a ton of them. Teen Wolf, An American Werewolf in London. There were a lot of them, and the majority of them were comedies. They had a comedic slant. I think probably the studios thought that young audiences in the '80s couldn't handle or didn't want a straightforward werewolf film, right? Which would kind of make sense at that time if you knew where horror was. But there were a couple serious ones. Silver Bullet, which I think is a pretty flawless and underrated werewolf film as well. And this was darker. Now, this is labeled as a horror comedy a lot of the times. And while it is satirical, the comedy comes from a really nasty, pessimistic, sinister place. I mean, even when you're laughing, you're uncomfortable about what you're laughing at. Now, Joe Dante kind of does that, right? Like Gremlins and The Burbs, but this one especially is a fairly pessimistic werewolf film, and I mean that as a compliment. Now, the plot, I sound like a broken record having covered, 5 or 6 of these things. So many of them are based on the same books. The plot involves a news anchor played by Dee Wallace who's being stalked by this lunatic, and she sort of coordinates with the police to set him up and get him arrested. Horrific sequence, actually, man. That scene at the peep show and what she has to watch and go through. Anyways, yeah, they botch the whole deal. She almost gets killed, but manages to see his face and kind of freaks out, slips into this psychotic state. Thus, her husband takes her to a secluded cabin, kind of let her reset, give her some emotional rest away from the city. But as we know, the town they're surrounded by is filled with some strange folk, and they turn into hairy beasts when the full moon comes out. With great effects by Rob Bottin. I mean, the transformation sequence in this is infamous, and rightly so. He did some amazing work. Now, we all know Dee Wallace's character would not stand there for 5 minutes and scream helplessly as parts of his body twisted and convulsed and boiled outward and hairs. But it doesn't matter, right? What matters is the effects. I just found this out doing a little bit of research that Rick Baker was originally in charge of the effects for this and left to do another film. I think it was American Werewolf in London. I could be wrong. So, Rob, I'm not sure if any of Rick Baker's work is left in this, but man, Rob Bottin knocked it out of the park, especially during the climax where there's a bunch of wolves and different stages of effects. And the whole last act of this film is solid, but the finale, like the very last 5 minutes, the punchline is creepy, man. It's unforgiving. It's dark, and I really dig it. I really dig this film a lot. Says on the back here, one of the best werewolf movies ever made. A quote from, just says Los Angeles. I'd agree with that, because it is. This should have been a franchise. It really should have. I mean, I know that it was, but a lot of fans don't consider any of the sequels canon, and I don't blame them. I'm not sure how much was in the novels, the original novels to mine, or what would have come after this if Philippe Mora hadn't taken over, and if they hadn't screwed with Howling 2, yada yada, whatever. That's a different story. But along with Killer Clowns from Outer Space, I sort of feel like the Howling, this original, got the short end of the stick in terms of where it could have gone with sequels, because I could see so many different directions you could take this other than where they ended up going. I don't have a lot of problems with this movie at all. Not at all. So I am going to cover Howling 7, the New Moon Rising, whatever that fuck it's called. I've been watching these backwards from 6 to this. Just sort of happened that way. But my buddy Derek at Astro Radio Z was curious to hear our thoughts, and we did watch it. So I am going to cover that and sort of summarize my feelings about the series in general. But this is a classic. It's a perfect film. And if you haven't seen it, well, if you're watching this, I fucking hope you've seen it, because I just spoiled the hell out of it. But amazing. One of Joe Dante's best. So cheers. Thanks for watching Blue City Reviews.